Thank you very much, Moazzam. Just something that Lindsey and Moazzam touched on was about prevent and how it's coming into law that every institution has to implement it. Schools, colleges, hospitals, your workplace have to implement it. So Scotland Against Criminalising Community, SACC, if you go onto their website, there's a statement there, and if you'd like to support that statement there. Now, the floor is open. If you'd like to make any comments, if you'd like to ask any questions of our panellists, then we're welcome to ask them now. And this lady can go first.
Thank you. I don't know about everyone else in the room, but when I marched against Stop the War, I wasn't marching for Islam, I wasn't marching for Muslims, I was marching against the war that our countries were getting involved in. I didn't want the mayhem, the destruction, the deaths that we'd suffered in the First and Second World Wars. And that was on the horizon. That's why I marched. Me and a few million others. I would like to address the young lady on the right, or on my right. Could you let me know what your Muslim women are doing to oppose the Islamic State and their progress through Syria and through the Middle East? It's absolutely mind-numbing that these people are getting away with, obviously, murder. It would be wonderful if the if groups and Muslims in this country would get together cohesively and show us that they are against Islamic State. I haven't seen that. I may be reading the wrong newspapers. I haven't seen that yet.
So we'll take 2 or 3 questions together.
One comment I'd like to make, that they've been bombing Iraq for 24 years since the first Gulf War. When they had the first Gulf War, they were still doing this no-fly zone bombing, and it has been continuous. A small country with no defence, they've been bombing Iraq for 24 years. It's really, if you put the First World War together and the Second World War together, it comes to like 8-9 years. This is a small country being bombed by the West. At the moment, there are 5 countries bombing Iraq, including Canada and Australia. Why? Just tell me why. What is terrorism? This is terrorism. For money, for the arms industry. This is wicked, and it's literally the people in the arms industry, the military corporations are making a lot of money out of this war. Secondly, let's have inspectors into the school that Tony Blair went into, and let's watch these children, the future Christian terrorism. This is Christian terrorism at its best. We must stop talking about Islamic terrorism all the time. Christian terrorism has been bombing Iraq for 24 years. Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, all of it, Iraq. This is Christian terrorism. Christian terrorism, whether we like it or not, this is Christian terrorism.
Thank you. The gentleman behind? Do you have a
I just wanted to comment about the name of ISIS. ISIS, it's not the Islamic State. It is what they call themselves Islamic State, and it is taken by the media. I watched today the BBC, the first time they said they call themselves the Islamic State after being rebuked.
That's fine, thank you. So you're saying
There is
nothing
no
Islamic
relation
about this?
whatsoever between ISIS and Islam.
Exactly.
Thank you. We'll take a couple more comments, then we'll come back to the
I
panel.
could never call that a war with Iraq. It was an attack on Iraq.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the question of ISIS, when the British politicians and the American politicians start apologising for creating ISIS,
Yes,
I think they're no apology due. They created it. If you listen to any of the descriptions, who is it why are they so militarily efficient?
Yes.
Because it's the Iraqi army.
Yes.
Who destroyed the Iraqi army? The British did. The Americans did. So I don't think there's any apologies required for that. I just wanted to talk about something different, because one of the things that's been used to stir up Islamophobia is the accusation of anti-Semitism. Anybody that criticises Israel is automatically labelled anti-Semitic and all the rest of it. And the tragedy is that we're seeing a parallel treatment of Muslims today, parallel to treatment of Jews in the 1920s and 1930s. Moazzam's absolutely right to say it appears apparently confusing. If you ask yourself, where is it coming from? There's an absolute logic to it. Who would have thought we'd be living in a country in 2015 where you've got food banks regularly across the country, and people don't even blink anymore, where you've got hundreds of thousands of people on 0 hours contracts, absolutely casual stuff, and at the same time you've got the banks raking it in, the rich getting richer and richer. How do they manage to get away with it? They get away with it by picking on scapegoats. In the 20s and 30s it was the Jews, today it's the Muslims. It's exactly the same disgusting process. But I think one of the good things that we need to learn from the past and from today is that it can be fought. Because if you look at the last election was very depressing, except in Scotland, that's absolutely true. But one of the things that you didn't notice was the BNP. Where's the BNP gone? They were opposed. They were fought by Muslims, by non-Muslims, by whites, by blacks, by gays, by straights. There was mass demonstrations, the same against the EDL, the same against the STL here. We can fight this thing if we unite. That's the key to it. We unite because we know who the enemy is. It's racism, it's austerity, it's all those sorts of things. We need unity of the people, the good people, who stand against all those things because we can win.
Questions. You're welcome to ask questions, so please do. I'll just take one from that.
I was at a meeting today in my community, and we were talking about criminality, and we were talking about a lot of things. And some of the people there said that there was a discussion about the arming of police in Scotland, through Police Scotland. And there was a big hue and cry, if you remember, when we discovered that regularly on our streets, police were armed. And one of the people there said, but how the police would be defensive, they're defenceless, if we didn't have the arms, if they weren't able to. I said, well, the only way to protect police is to get them out their cars and onto their feet, because the amount of cops that are killed in car crashes far outweighs, and it's like an illogical. It's like we're fed rubbish, and then we speak rubbish, right? And this is the danger. The danger is we look to who they say are our enemies, and they can be our enemies. There's no doubt that I wouldn't, you said it, your friends have been killed. They're no friends of yours, they're no friends of mine. But I know where my enemy is, right? And my enemy is who is creating the situation where people round about me are speaking rubbish, right? They're being fed rubbish, and therefore they'll get that. So the point I think that Donnie and others are making is that austerity and anti-war go together. Because the people who are voting UKIP are often people who are displaced in society, who didn't see some kind of recognition that they've been looked at and whatever. And that is because they normally would get the crap end of everything. And the danger is that if we didn't fight austerity, then people will start to look for scapegoats. Actually, in my community, there is racism, there's Islamophobia, but there's more than that. There's harmony, there's peaceful things. At the weekend, the Nepalese family, right, the whole community came out, right, and had a big feast in one of the community centres. And everybody shared the food, and then the money was to go to the earthquake. There's actually the positives as well as the negatives, and we've got to stress the positives. And what Lindsey said, I'll finish on this, the 20th, if you're against war, you have to be out on the 20th against austerity, because we share that common bond, right? If we're going to fight for a better world, and if it's a better Scotland, we have to fight to remove food banks as well as Trident. The two things are linked, and that's what we should be arguing as political.
comment and I'll come back with more questions, so be patient with me. Lindsay, do you want to make any comments?
Yeah, just a couple of points on what's been said. I mean, obviously I agree with a lot of things that have been said. I do think that we have to look at all these wars in a context, and I think the context of this of what's going on in the Middle East today is imperialist intervention over decades. People have pointed out that the bombing, and not just the bombing, but the sanctions which killed an estimated 500,000 children, has been going on since 1991. So all of these things happen. Now, in my opinion, I'm quite pessimistic about, you know, when this lady said about how do we stop a war in the Middle East, it seems to me that the forces involved, in which I regard Saudi Arabia as a particularly damaging, and which is funding ISIS, by the way, it has been funding ISIS and all this kind of thing. I think there's going to be bigger wars in the Middle East. I'm sorry to say, before it kind of dies down. Now, I think in that situation, we have to be very clear in this country. We oppose what our government's doing. We oppose the bombing. We oppose their allies. I don't think we should be selling any arms to Saudi Arabia or any other dictatorship in the area. I was absolutely horrified when they had the flags at half-mast when the king of Saudi Arabia died, and that told you absolutely everything you need to know about this horrible, you know, the human rights government, so-called, you know, the democracy and all this other kind of thing. So I think it's very, very important that we do these things. Just to take up a point that the woman there who said about Muslims need to get together to oppose ISIS. Personally, I don't think it's up to the Muslims to, you know, why should they have to say more than anybody else? If somebody here is a Christian, why should they have to denounce George Bush or Tony Blair, who acts like a sort of vicar?
I just want them to make an effort. Just make an effort. Let the public see that the Muslims in this country do not approve of Islamic State. Get together and tell us.
But I think they've done that. I think they've done that.
I must be reading the wrong page.
If you allow them to answer.
If you allow us to speak, you've identified earlier on that yes, you probably are reading the wrong newspaper. You look at that we've identified that the media is stoking all of this, and particularly the right-wing media, particularly the Telegraph and their Mail on Sunday and the Express and all of that. Hear me out. But they all get affected. All the other papers get affected. Now, we have been bending over backwards so much. We've been called so many names. We've been vilified so many times. And you're talking to someone who's been tortured and beaten and taken away from his family and held in 4 prisons, military prisons, in 2 secret prisons, in a British top security prison, and I've never had my day in court. And this wasn't in a third world country, this was in Britain and America. So we have been talking at the forefront against ISIS. In fact, the problem is this. I came out and started to speak against ISIS because I was in Syria. I'm not just talking from an armchair perspective. I was there on the ground, and I saw some of the extremists and what they were capable of. And when I came back, I started to speak out against them, and I got arrested. And what's important, the reason why I spoke out is because you only know them because of the Westerners they killed, because of the hostages, those poor innocent hostages that they dressed in orange Guantanamo-style suits, and they beheaded. But I spoke out against them when nobody cared because they were only killing Arabs and Muslims. And that's the point, because I know they appear very barbaric to you over here, and they are. But you've got to look back at the history. You have to. 17 members of ISIS, 17 of its top leaders, were imprisoned by British and American forces in Camp Booker and Abu Ghraib. Abu Ghraib is that place where people were held in naked prisoner pyramids and urinated upon and defecated upon. And they brought in men and women and children and raped them in front of their parents. This is all coming out.
This is the Western.
By the Western troops.
Christian Western.
Yes, it was Western troops who were doing this. And ISIS when they dress people in orange suits and execute them, what are they saying? The orange suit isn't a natural prisoner of color of Iraqi prisoners. It's an American, it's a Guantanamo prison suit. It's an Abu Ghraib prison suit. So whilst we have to completely condemn, and we do it so much now, we're sick of it. We're sick to death as a community of being told to condemn and condemn and condemn and condemn, because nobody's listening to us saying that if you're going to punch me repeatedly, I will block it. And I might end up just punching you right back. And that's what's happening. So we can't be constantly told to condemn, to condemn, to condemn, to condemn, because if we're going to be told that, look how many, we should be saying to the entire British population, just like Al-Qaeda says, that the entire British population should be condemning now till kingdom come, because they've killed over 1 million people there. So we're just like...
Well, the young lad that was tied up to the pole and had a bazooka shot at him, he didn't have an orange suit on in Palmyra.
No, he didn't.
And all the headless bodies that were left lying about, they didn't have orange suits on.
You're right, my dear, and that's what I'm saying. We've been opposing ISIS right from the beginning. I lived with people who've been butchered by ISIS.
Don't patronise me, please.
And I'm not patronising. I said
It
I lived
sounds
with
like
people.
it. It sounds like it.
Well, he's answering your question.
He's patronising.
Well, I don't think so, but I mean...
Well, I
Well, we'll agree to disagree on that if you'd just like to hear the answer. Thank you.
Really?
Basically, what's ringing through my head right now is a slogan, thinking globally, acting locally. And I don't know where they've nicked that from, because it's not my slogan, but I've heard it from somewhere, thinking globally, acting locally. And this is very, very important, I think, because we think, oh, what is it that we can do? How are we going to make a difference to what's going on like hundreds of miles away from us? But we can make whatever difference we can. We can try to make a difference. And this is where, for example, ISIS, they have a huge presence on social media. I think one of the main ways that they're targeting people is through Facebook. They're targeting them through Twitter. They're targeting them through Instagram. They've got huge following on social media. And who's on social media? The youngsters. It's the youth. It's the teenagers. It's the people in their early 20s. They're big on social media. But this is why I think it's very, very important that Muslim Women's Association of Edinburgh is working with the youth. This is why I think it's important that we are doing work with youngsters, because if we educate them properly, and if we tell them, no, your religion isn't telling you to be violent, no, the Quran isn't telling you to do this, no, the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings upon him, isn't that, okay? If we tell our youth that, then when they're faced with something from ISIS, when they're faced with ideologies which they don't recognise, they're going to be able to say, hang on, that's not what I believe in, and I'm not going to support you.
We'll just go round, we'll take one final lot of questions, and I'll come to all of you, okay? So we'll just start at that end.
Sam, can I just add to Safeena?
Just please, just 1 minute.
All right,
Aisha.
Sorry, I'm from the Women's Association of Edinburgh. I just want to just add on to what Safeena just said. Can I just say we're a very small organisation, but one thing that we do, we highly get a lot of requests from a lot of schools, a lot of people. I'm going to just quickly give a few examples due to time. We have high school teachers who are very, very concerned, even after giving their religious moral education curriculum, even after giving their curriculum on Islam, they come back and they say, you know what, our high school children are still anti-Muslim. Can you help us? What do we do? How do we engage in them? How do we get rid of it? Right? And that's what the Muslim Women's Association do. We do interact with them and we do engage with them and we help these teachers to help, alleviate the fear of Islam. The other thing I'd like to say is also that we also have focus groups. We have researchers, we have from all over the UK, not just in Scotland, who approach us and say, do you know what, can we have a focus group? Can we get Muslim women together? We want to know how they feel. Can you do this poll? Can you do this? Can you do that? And recently, just a few months ago, we had local Edinburgh Muslim women come together, talking about what's happening, the Islamophobia that's happening. They came back to us, the Muslim women, and said to us, you know what, we are fearful of going out at night time. We do not go out, we changed our habit of how we live in Edinburgh by not going out at night time. We don't allow our children to go out at night time, especially our girls, because it's visible that we are Muslims, because we wear head coverings, and we're more likely to be attacked. So because we're fearful of that, we have to change our way of living. And this is in Edinburgh, I'm talking locally. Also, I would like to say that we also have people, right, just recently, about a month ago, we had somebody from Italy approach us, right? This man approached me and said, I'm a Muslim, I have a child in Italy, I'm married to an Italian woman, and being a Muslim in Italy is really, really bad. Because it's terrible. I can't explain to you how bad it is. I've heard Scotland is a great country to live in. Even though he's got a fantastic job, he's got an Italian wife, everything, he is willing to uproot his family, to get a better life. And he's had such great, great things about Scotland. And he said, before I make such a big sacrifice, is it true what I'm hearing about Scotland? And that this is just a tip on the iceberg of what Muslim Association of Edinburgh are dealing with and doing.
Thank you very much.
I just want to make a couple of points. I think the vilification, the stereotyping of Muslim women is part of the war on terror, because Muslim women have the right to wear the hijab and have the right to wear the niqab and dress as they wish, basically, and nobody has any right to Europeanise them, basically, that's their rights. And they have the right to feel safe, whether it's during the day or at night. And it's disgraceful how they're attacked, hijabs are pulled off and stuff like that while they're walking down the street. Or in France, you're not allowed to wear it in public places, you're not allowed to wear it in education. Women are excluded out of the education system, basically discriminated. And so as a socialist, I stand completely for the right for Muslim women to have that right, basically. And I think Muslim women have played a very, very progressive role, not just through history, but also in recent times. If we look at the Egyptian revolution, where women played a role right at the forefront, if we look in the Palestinian movement, where women play an important role in that struggle. So Muslim women have contributed something very significant and important to our society, basically, and our struggle internationally. And we're not only against selling of the arms to Israel, we're also against selling of arms to Egypt, the SACC, who is advised by Tony Blair, and we sell arms to them to kill activists and other campaigners and anybody for democracy and against the regime. So, and finally, what I'd like to say is that I think like some of the racism and the stereotyping and the oppression of Muslims isn't that different from Jewish people and Irish people and what they faced in the century before that. And I think it is possible to fight back, to bring black and white people together to fight against racism. And I think an important part of that process is about educating people about the oppression of Muslims and the discrimination that they face, in order to undermine that racism and to fight together.
Thank you. This lady and then that gentleman in the back.
I just wanted to say that I went to your march because I didn't want innocent people to die in Iraq. And I've never been to Iraq, I don't know any Iraqi people, but that's just a basic, human thing. And I feel we should be fighting the same way for Muslim people. There shouldn't be a difference. And it's very sad that we're getting our opinion and knowledge of Muslim people from the government rather than asking them themselves and engaging with the Muslim community, which we should be doing. We should be protecting each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, can I make, just a quick observation and then ask a question as well. I just wanted to say something in response to the earlier question about why don't the Muslim community all get together and just demonstrate that they're not connected to ISIS or don't support ISIS. And I mean, there's two things that I'd just like to say about that. First of all, all the Muslims that I've spoken to, both in Britain and in the Middle East where I've been there, are all kind of perplexed about this, because to them there is absolutely no connection between their faith and what these guys are doing over there. Now, some of them might take inspiration from texts, but certainly a lot of the stuff that I've read, or certainly a French hostage that was in their care and keeping for a while and actually managed to get away, was saying that all they were talking about was political grievances and so on. Now, I would say that, I mean, someone made an example of the Christian sort of conflation, but let's remember Israel-Palestine as well, and that, we've got this ongoing argument about about what Israel was doing to the Palestinians and how that fits with Judaism. And an awful lot of people are trying to conflate the religion of Judaism with the oppression that's going on in Palestine. And again, as with this, it's a very dangerous thing to do. And I can't imagine anybody in their sensible mind would expect the Jewish community here to be lined up and make excuses for the actions of Israel. The religion and political oppression and how that's reacted to are very, very different things. The other thing, in terms of question, really it was for Moazzam actually, because I'm aware of what Cage are doing and how a lot of people are mobilised about this general problem with Islamophobia and some of the actions that the British state are trying to put together to cause mischief. And some of the things I've read obviously are seeking to undermine what solidarity is occurring between those who are concerned about these tendencies and the kind of work that you're doing. And I can see there are mischief makers that are saying, actually, people who I presume predominantly on the left, who would be naturally wanting to support what you do, are being cried off effectively by saying, how can the left be making common cause with people like yourself and Cage, who represent a fairly reactionary and conservative and maybe a liberal religious persuasion. So could you say something about that, please?
Come back and just hold on to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back briefly to what Moazzam talked about in terms of Palmerston and interests, because I think it's worth unpicking that a little bit more. Because one of the things which all the time the British government talks about is the national interest, as if that was somehow an indivisible thing, and David Cameron's interests were our interests. And I think one of the big responsibilities that we all have is to really change that narrative, to say that when David Cameron speaks, he doesn't speak for us. His interests are not our interests. It's really interesting, actually. I do think if you arrived from outer space and actually observed his activities for a period of time, certainly during the last government, and thought, what is this man for? Actually, I think he's a travelling salesman for the big arms companies, because he was trotting around the world selling arms for more time than I think any other British Prime Minister has ever done before, although Tony Blair ran him very, very close. That's what he does. It's about profit, it's about the huge military-industrial complex and the arms corporations and so on, and also oil and profit, and that's what it's about. And those interests are not our interests, and they sure as hell aren't in the interests of the people who live in the Middle East as well. And unfortunately, there's a book on the table here, Enemy on Euphrates. This didn't start 20 years ago, it started 100 years ago. It started as oil became the most precious commodity, the most valuable commodity in the world. And that's what it's about. And people's lives are being torn apart by that process. And that comes down to us here, and I thought Safeena's thing about thinking global and acting local is exactly the right thing for this, because we have to understand what's going on internationally, because that's where wars are starting, but we also have to understand how we deal with that here, because it's here, among the people we work with, the people we study with, the people we live with, you can start to reverse that narrative. And it's the simple acts of solidarity that you do to do that that really make a difference.
That's great. Thank you very much.
One quick comment.
No, can you just hold on, please? This lady's going to comment.
Relating to education, which comes from one of the before streaming now. So he's asking, do young Muslims have any space to discuss politics without attracting accusations of radicalism? Young people need space to discuss what's going on in their lives and the society around them.
That's fine. Okay. Do you want to ask questions?
Sorry, I would like more because I think, what we did in Iraq is absolutely distasteful. But the problem now is in Iraq, it's Sunni versus Shia. How do we do anything about that?
Okay, we can come to that. Because it was never a problem before the war. Just a quick comment.
The thing is, on for 24 years by Muslims, I think all of Britain would be terrorists, or would they be resistance fighters?
Thank you. I've got 2 or 3 people who want to make quick comments, but please be very quick and I'll just go around everybody. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, well, just to say that obviously we've been talking about ISIS tonight. I mean, I think we should remember that after Britain and America was victorious in Iraq, they set up a sectarian political system. Well, one group of Muslims was pitted against another, and this ISIS has grown out of that. And the attempt, if you like, the reflection of the Arab Spring in Iraq was, you know, when people demonstrated against the government in Iraq, they were attacked brutally. Peaceful demonstrations were attacked brutally by a government that we supported in the West. And we get reaction from one of the communities in Iraq now to that repression. It's something that ISIS can feed on, because people feel afraid and they look to people to defend them. And you know, when the Iraqi army comes into the community, they're not saying, oh, that's great, the Iraqi army's coming and it'll defend us against ISIS. They think, God, these people are coming and they may kill us. Because we're a different part of the Islamic community. And that is the problem. And I think, as has happened many, many times in British history, the history of British imperialism, we create divide and rule in a country that we've tried to subdue. And we live with the consequences for decades and decades. We don't have to look very far away, Northern Ireland. You know, where Christians were quite prepared to kill each other. But who was behind that? You know, Christians in Northern Ireland and Ireland as a whole didn't benefit from that. The British government did, the British ruling class benefited for hundreds of years. Hopefully now that has come to an end, although it's still simmering away. The things we do when we enter a country and destroy its infrastructure, we set up a political system that depends on sectarianism. No one should think there are not consequences of that. And the rise of ISIS is a consequence of that.
Thank you very much.
I've got a bit of a cold, but I just wanted to ask about Guantanamo, because that's sort of on my mind. We've talked about it a bit, but we haven't really talked about the prisoners that are still there that much, and I just wondered if you wanted to comment on what chance there is that maybe they'll get sent back before Obama ends his administration, and in particular Shaka Amar.
Still there, that's fine. So the last comment, yes.
Yeah, okay, I'll make mine small. Duncan said basically quite a bit of what I was going to say. But I want to say the first thing here, and I want to make it clear, it's been said a couple of times, maybe more already. Muslims do not have to come out and apologise for what ISIS do, because that's not what they should have to do as a community. Anybody who thinks that is completely 100% wrong. The Muslims in this country are not ISIS, and when you conflate them as being the same thing and saying they have to come out and apologise for them, all you're doing is pushing the agenda of the right-wing media and the capitalist ruling class, and you're pushing them down in society to the lowest, to the bottom, and you're treading on them and all of the rights that they have. And that is a disgrace. We have to stand with them and stand up for them and not make them apologise for something that they didn't create, that we created. I just want to say something
Do you want to go first about space for young Muslims is it easy for them to talk politics?
Well, I think it might be quite difficult, but I think we are having some breakthroughs in that we have members of the Muslim community, for example, who are part of like Scottish Parliament. You know, we've got, so we do have young people who are quite politically, they're politically active, and we've got university students as well who campaign for the rights of refugees, things like that. So we do have a degree of political activism within the youngsters in the Muslim community. Whether or not that's going to come back and bite them in the bum, I don't actually know. You know, none of us knows what the future holds. But what I will be intrigued about is in August of this year, there's a scheduled case which is going to be going through the High Court of Justiciary. And it's about a young medical student, 29 years old, medical student from Aberdeen, I think it's Aberdeen, and he's being tried under terrorism charges. And what was he doing? I think it's reported that what he was doing was looking at certain websites or looking at information online. So that case is going to be going through in August. That's when the trial is scheduled to start. But it will be really, the outcome of that case will be really interesting, because then that will really tell us in Scotland, that will really set the tone basically, I think, the outcome of that case.
That's great, thank you. Moazzam, do you want to tackle the question that you've been put? But first of all, Guantanamo prisoners were still there?
Yeah, can I just go to the gentleman?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so one of the things that Cage did recently was, Cage had some interaction, or my colleagues in Cage had some interaction from several years ago, with a man called Mohammed al-Wazi, who was believed to be Jihadi John. And one of the things that an unfortunate comment I think my colleague made that was misunderstood, because he said he was, in the past tense, a beautiful man. But it's been reported as if he's saying he's talking about him in the present tense. And I think that's disingenuous, because this describes quite clearly how there's a refusal to look at what is the process that caused this person, who says constantly, I'm being harassed by the security services, that they stop me from traveling in order to get married, they stop me from getting my job. I felt like, and he wrote to one of the, to Robert Burkett, who was an independent journalist, he said, I feel like a dead man walking. I'm suicidal, and I think I'm going to get killed. Something along that line. Now, when there's a complete refusal by the politicians, by the journalists, by the media, to look at why is this man, who's got all of these symptoms that clearly show he's alienated, that we don't want to look at that at all. Rather, whoever relates that story, we're going to vilify them too. And that's what happened by some sections of the media. But simultaneously, what's really important is that actually David Cameron, the following day, which wasn't picked up on, he ordered an inquiry into the allegations that the British government had been complicit in the torture of Michael Adebayo before he killed Lee Rigby. So nobody's saying that Britain caused this man to become a beheading monster. No, ISIS is responsible for that. He's responsible for that. But what caused him to feel that he didn't belong in Britain? What caused him to be like that? And this is what we've been asking after all. In my case, in the case of the Libyans, in the case of the Syrians, in the case of anybody who's been rendered with British complicity through secret detention sites of torture, we want to know that those agents who were physically present when we were being stripped naked, when we were being kicked and beaten and tortured, when we were having our children's pictures waved in front of us, with the sound of a woman screaming next door that we were told that our wife being tortured. Those British agents who were in there at that time, are they guilty of a crime or not? Are they complicit in torture? Because that's what we've been asking right from the beginning, and to this day, 10 years on, nothing has happened. And you see, that's the bigger message of what we've been trying to say. And the reason why we've been attacked so hard is because we're talking to power, we're talking accountability to power. And it's really hard to do that, as everybody knows. MP's expenses had people up in a completely horrified. But these are people's lives. This is torture. This is murder. And so when we're talking to power and saying that you're responsible, at least take responsibility for that part of it which you know you've been involved in. They want to say, no, let's shoot the messenger. So I think it's going to be an uphill struggle on that case. In relation to the Guantanamo thing, Obama's ordered it closed down more times than I can remember. He's a paper tiger when it comes to Guantanamo. It doesn't mean anything. When the most powerful man in the world says, I'm going to do something regularly, and just doesn't do it. I believe that Obama wants to close it. He's constantly stopped by Congress and the hawks within it to do that. But it has become, and he said himself, that it doesn't do the United States any favors. It is abhorrent to what they believe to be the American way of life, i.e. they believe in habeas corpus, the right to trial before you're in prison. But none of that's happened. And remember this, that nobody out of the 600 plus prisoners released from Guantanamo, including myself, were released as a result of any legal process. That's shameful. each person that's been released, whether it's to Sudan or to Afghanistan or to Mauritania or wherever, or to Britain, they were released because of embarrassment or because agreements between governments, not because of any legal process. I know Guantanamo prosecutors and soldiers who served there who resigned and said, I'm going to join the military to do this. And I know several Guantanamo guards who served there who are totally ashamed of what their country is doing. And several of them are my friends to this day. We're close friends, actually. But their voices always get drowned out because, just remember this, Guantanamo was set up in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. Right? So we were told that terrorists have been caught and that the perpetrators are going to be taken to justice. Not one person out of the 800 people held in Guantanamo at any given time has ever been prosecuted for the reason why Guantanamo was open 9/11. No one's been prosecuted and convicted of it. So it's still there. There's over 120 prisoners there, the majority of whom will never see a court. And the ones who are seeing a court, there's a handful of them, are put through something called the military commissions process, which only applies in Guantanamo. It's not the military code of justice, it's not the civilian law, it's a special law created, a special system created for Guantanamo, where you can hearsay evidence. We don't have a jury, we have a 3-panel members of the military who've already designated you as an enemy combatant. They're going to determine whether you're innocent or guilty of crimes that have only been created in the Guantanamo arena.
Lindsey, do you want to comment on future in Iraq and general thoughts?
Yeah, just a couple of points. I mean, firstly, the point about the divisions, the point that was made by the man there about the divisions in Iraq and elsewhere. That, you know, it's always people look at wars, and it always looks almost incomprehensible that one group fighting against each other and they've always been doing this forever is the story that we're given. Now, actually, that isn't true in Iraq. It wasn't true that people identified themselves as Sunni and Shia in a divisive way before the war happened. And what you've had is that ever since 2003 in the occupation, the Americans in particular, aided and abetted by the British, and the American embassy was a massive centre of this, created all sorts of sectarian divisions quite deliberately. They built walls in the city to keep one population apart from the other. They did all these things. They were absolutely clear about doing it. They backed the government until recently. Well, they still do back it effectively. They got rid of Maliki, but they backed a government which they knew was carrying out sectarian policies vis-a-vis the Sunni in Anbar and some of the western areas of Iraq. They are absolutely culpable in this stuff. Now, I do think that where we are now, it will probably get worse in terms of, and some of this will be in terms of religious divisions and alliances with particular countries like Iran that are Shia and so on against the Sunnis. I think we're in quite a difficult position, but let us not forget where this comes from, that never, you know, the truth is, and again, we mentioned Ireland, the truth is most Catholics and Protestants around the world don't act in a state of continuous antagonism to one another. That was created in Northern Ireland by the state and by the way in which the British forces and security forces and so on actually operated. So we do need to be clear about this. And in terms of ISIS, ISIS is a product of war. Patrick Coburn, and there's a couple of copies of the book at the back, Patrick Coburn's book on this is very, very good. He said they are actually the creation of war. They couldn't exist without the chaos, without the disaster that existed there. And let's remember as well, who are the people that ISIS are fighting? Actually, they're other Muslims. You know, this idea it's a Muslim-Christian war, it isn't. It isn't what's going on. And it's a, you know, we really shouldn't see it in those kind of ways. Just in terms of here in Britain, what we're talking about with Islamophobia and these attacks on civil liberties, this is not a Muslim problem. It's a British problem. It's a European problem. It's a problem of people who are setting themselves up to support imperialism against a group of people who come from countries which have been attacked and who don't like what has happened. That's what it's about. And we have to see it like that. And the idea that the solution to this is that Muslims take off their scarves, that they stop behaving in the way that they're doing, they stop worshipping in that way. we should remember again the anti-Semitism. I mean, there's still anti-Semitism, and actually it rises in this country every time there's an attack on Palestine. And if you look at the figures, actually it's not true. You know, some people say it doesn't really exist. It does exist, and it clearly is today connected with the Middle East. But there is still anti-Semitism on the general level. But it's nothing like, in the 30s, it was the main racism in Europe. Now that's anti-Muslim racism. There's no question about it. But let's remember about the Jews in the 1930s. The German Jews were the most integrated. They didn't believe it was going to happen to them. That's why many of them did suffer in the concentration camps. They couldn't believe that German Jews in particular, who were integrated in society, went to the same schools, did all these kind of things. It isn't about integration. It's about racism. It's about scapegoating in a time of crisis, and that's what we're seeing here again, that we're seeing with the austerity, the people who are selling the arms and making profit from the arms aren't the people who are suffering, it's the people at the bottom of society. And what they want to do is to say, okay, it's not our fault, it's the immigrant who's taking your job. It's the Muslim who looks different from you or has a different religion from you. And unless we reject that kind of analysis, things will get a lot worse in this country. Now, I'm actually hopeful, despite all the bad things that go on in this country, I'm actually very, very hopeful that a majority of people in this country don't want to see that. They don't want a crisis where everybody turns against each other. But that means we have to organise, we have to campaign, we have to fight on all these fronts to make sure that these things don't happen, and to make sure that we live in a society where they talk about equality, but it's not just talked about, it's something which becomes a reality. And that's still a very, very long way away for the vast majority of Muslims in this country.
Before we finish off, Pete, do you have an announcement for me?
But just, I wanted to say thank you for the support from Scotland Against Criminalising Communities and the Muslim Women's Association of Edinburgh for kind of getting this meeting off the ground tonight. And if you, I know the sign-up sheet's gone around, but if you want to get involved in some of this campaigning work over the next months and years, please do keep in contact with Edinburgh Stop the War through our Facebook page, through the website, and come along to meetings. We meet formally once a month on the third Monday in the month, but we do also meet to organise things and build things again.